improve services for Wellington.
Question number 5, Dr Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance and asks, will the government have to borrow further to pay for the latest Christchurch earthquakes?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, we won't have a clear idea of that until we know the likely costs and where they fall. However, it does appear that the damage that has occurred as a result of the most recent earthquake has occurred largely in areas that already required substantial repair. The member will be aware that the government set aside a fund of $5.5 billion in the last budget, and that allowed for considerable uncertainty around the estimates of costs. So it could be some time before we know whether that particular event is going to require more money allocated to that fund.
Dr Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Will the Minister reconsider the case for raising an earthquake levy, given that the most recent earthquakes have thrown into doubt what the final cost might be?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, no, we don't plan to reconsider it. The government, as we indicated in the budget, has the capacity to fund its share of the Christchurch rebuilding costs. There are other more significant issues at the moment which need to be resolved to allow the rebuild to continue. Funding isn't the main one.
Dr Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In light of his earlier comments that the government is very keen to reduce government borrowing, would an earthquake levy be one way to reduce government borrowing?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, in a technical sense, I suppose it would, as would putting up taxes or raising GST further or whatever. I mean, the government's come to what we believe is a pretty balanced approach where we're constraining government spending. We have done a reorganisation of the tax system which we believe will be beneficial to the economy, and now we just want to get on with growing the economy, having resolved those issues.
Dr Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Is he aware that the Christchurch City Council is proposing to raise an earthquake levy on ratepayers? And is it not a cruel paradox that the very people least able to pay an earthquake levy, the ratepayers of Christchurch, may have to pay a levy when the rest of the country doesn't?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, certainly the burden of the earthquake falls by far the most heavily on the people of Christchurch. That is why I think the rest of New Zealand will effectively be paying for the rebuild. I mean, we've borrowed the money now, it's got to be repaid later with interest, and all New Zealanders are going to be contributing to that. The government is working alongside the City Council very closely now to work out what is the best division of the burden of cost, including those that fall on the Council.
Dr Russell Norman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does the Minister stand by his earlier argument that an earthquake levy is the wrong way to pay for the earthquake rebuild when the economy is weak or in recession? Does he stand by that argument in light of the fact that Treasury are now predicting an average of 3.1% growth over the next 5 years?
The Honourable Bill English.
Yes, Mr Speaker. I mean, we considered all these issues in the period between the February earthquake and the budget, and the government, the government believes it struck about the right balance between generalised fiscal constraint on the one hand, because to assist the progress of the economy and get the government's books into order, and our ability to fund the earthquake. Had the costs been larger, or had it been more difficult to get the deficit under control, of course it's possible we could have looked at either a levy or a tax increase. In the end, we decided that wasn't a good idea.
Question number 6, Grant Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.